Thank you, Paul. So just as we're starting to get going today, I thought it was worth pausing to think that although we've got the conference today and a lot of the topics are being pitched at an introductory level, so maybe they're new things that you've not considered before, the conference and the topics are not happening in a vacuum. I mean, these topics, miracles, evolution, science and faith, they've been talked about, discussed, chewed over, disagreed with, fallen out on, but also rejoiced and delighted in for many, many years before today. So what you may hear today, I'm hoping, from our speakers might be new, but it will be part of a continuing conversation as well. So discussions around science and faith in Scotland especially have been particularly rich and with a long history. I lived here for 10 years, moving away about 6 or 7 years ago now. But I found Scotland to be a particularly kind of thrilling and dynamic place for these conversations around science and faith. And what I learned here has challenged and shaped how I think about these topics today. And I'd say conversations, and they were conversations, they weren't arguments. The people here and how they talk to each other and listen to each other is also, I think, quite distinctive and really helped to enrich that experience as well, and model a better way for talking about science and faith. So I hope you'll indulge me a little as I kind of tip the hat a bit at some of the organisations and groups who kind of have influenced my journey here during my time in Scotland. So the first of those, I say, is the Gifford Lectures, which I'm sure most of you would have heard about. I mean, these have a very long history, over a century, discussing a huge variety of different topics. But two that I attended really still stick out in my mind, kind of 15, 20 years later. And one was by Professor Simon Conway Morris here in Edinburgh, where he talked about convergent evolution. And he got across not just kind of the detail and the wonder of life, but also kind of the beauty and the kind of rich dynamic that evolution is as a way of explaining how all that life is connected. It was quite, for a physicist, it was an extreme eye-opener. And as a physicist who ended up doing biology research, quite helpful. The second one was from Peter Harrison, who's a historian of scientists. And at the time, I hadn't really looked into the history of science or anything like that. But his talk was something we touched upon last night here as well, and how often what we say to one another, we use the same words, but actually we talk past each other because how we understand the words depends on our own individual histories and the cultures we're coming from. So when we talk about science and religion or science and faith, actually we often miss what each other is saying. So we have to be more careful to listen to one another. And his lectures were also a lesson for me in that when we talk about science and faith, it's not just a matter of hard science or hard doctrine, but we need that kind of grease from the humanities and from human compassion and understanding to work between those gears of science and doctrine to actually create a better, a more wholesome way of talking about these topics. So those are the Gifford Lectures, but then up in St Andrews as well, there were two big initiatives, which were the James Gregory Lectures and the Scientists in Congregations programme. And between these two, they drew in a lot of conversations in schools, in churches, and for large university audiences. And the programmes were a great success in their own right. And it kind of led to a kind of focus on science-engaged theology. That's now at the Divinity School in St Andrews. And talking of Divinity Schools, closer to home here in Edinburgh, we now have what is very convincingly, arguably, the best science and religion group in the UK. We have a representative here today, which has only made it even better since she's been there. But yeah, it was a new series of postgraduate programs and modules on science and faith, and it's continued to produce, over the last 10, 15 years, MSc and PhD graduates in science and faith, which really, as the science and faith field has been developing and growing in the last 20 years, this is what we really need, is a new generation of people to carry on the adventure, as it were, and to really help the church bring itself forward with science as science develops. So we had Mark Harris here last night, who was in charge of it, and he was telling me that, oh yeah, you know, we've got 10 or so people in person. And I was like, wow, that's great. And he's like, yeah. But then he says, we've got about 70 each year doing it on the online course. So that's like 80 people doing a master's in science and religion at the Divinity School here in Edinburgh, which I think, frankly, is amazing and a huge step forward to where we were before that started. Christians in Science, our own organisation, has been active here as well, although not as active as we'd like, and hopefully today will be a spur and a kind of motivation for that to change. But we've had local groups across Scotland for a while. We've run 2-day conferences here in Edinburgh as well, the last in 2018, so quite long ago. So hopefully we won't wait as long for the next one. We've also had the Grasping the Nettle initiative, which does exactly what it says on the tin. It grasps this thorny problem of science and faith in our churches and really tries to confront it head on and train and equip people in our churches to understand it better. And before Murdo thinks I've maybe overlooked the SRT, there's also been the Society of Religion and Technology project. I'm saving the best till last, which has over 50 years now of work from the Church of Scotland looking at, when we might think science and faith topics are a little bit dry and academic, go and look at the SRT. They are involved with thinking about how new technologies, new sciences, everything from genetic engineering to how we work our economies, has practical and direct impacts on people's lives day to day. It's a great example from the SRT there. So as well as these organisations, just in a couple of minutes I've got remaining, I want to name drop a couple of people as well. I don't often like name dropping people, but Scotland has had giants in the field. So we were celebrating Donald Mackay's anniversary at our last but one conference back in October last year. So he's a kind of giant in the field in the mid part of the last 20th century. We've had people like Malcolm Jeeves up at St Andrews, also from that kind of generation of first scientist theologians that emerged in the kind of like 1950s, 60s period in the UK. Eric Priest was the kind of a lot of the brains behind the James Gregory lectures and professor of magneto hydrodynamics, stars. But these are big names that we can be proud of, that are great scientists but great Christians who have not just engaged in science, not just engaged in theology, but have really done a lot to engage church audiences and public audiences with understanding science and theology better. So I've been mentioning lots of Christian organisations and lots of Christians, but what I found here in Edinburgh was, like, you've got the Royal Society of Edinburgh, you've got the International Science Festival, you've got local groups from places like the Institute of Physics, and they give great science talks, but more often than not, they're talking about things that touch on science and faith matters as well. And people are interested and eager for those conversations beyond the walls of our kind of Christian church sphere. That's maybe an area we need to be thinking more about, that people are interested in these conversations, but maybe come at them from non-traditional angles. So how we engage with science and religion is in a period of change, as is just public engagement with science in general. So conversations, I think, are coming to the fore. Interaction is coming to the fore, not just, I'm guilty of this here, standing at the front and talking at you. New ways of talking about science and faith are arising, and there's this new generation, like I say, of scientists, theologians who are there to kind of help us crest the wave, as it were. So this creates new opportunities that I think Scotland will rise to. And talking of new opportunities, I'd like to invite Murdo up just to say a little bit about the Christians in Science group based here in Edinburgh. Murdo.